Hi, everyone. I want to start out our discussion of South Africa by looking at the geography of this place and some salient features of that. Geography obviously has a tremendous impact on the way that human societies take shape, and I want to be aware of what I think is the unique geography of South Africa before we dive into this subject matter. If you look at the physical map of South Africa here, one of the things that you'll notice is how elevated most of the country is. In fact, if we were to pan out and see the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, we would see that Central and Southern Africa is mostly one big plateau, and that's obvious here. All of this stuff in brown is a plateau that reaches upwards of 1,500 to 2,000 meters. So we're talking 3,000 to 4,000 feet, up to 5,000 to 6,000 feet, I suppose, in the more elevated areas. And that it is also very arid, and we'll look at a rainfall map here in a minute, right? So we have kind of dry plateau over most of southern Africa. The other unique feature about South Africa, in addition to the plateau, is this mountain range. These are really quite new mountains in geological terms, although Africa is not. It is a tectonically quite old place. The Drakensberg escarpment represents these quite rigid, jagged mountains there. And most of the country of Lesotho, which is this country right in the middle of South Africa here, I often call this the donut hole country, right? But almost all of Lesotho is in the mountains. In fact, it is called by the natives there the Mountain Kingdom of Lesotho, right? But the Drakensberg escarpment runs not just through Lesotho, but also kind of up to the north here, and down to the south of Lesotho, right? So a fair distance through South Africa, and this is an imposing physical barrier that cuts off the region down here, which is called KwaZulu-Natal today, from the regions up here on the plateau, the Free State region, and what the Europeans historically called the Transvaal region, what now is occupied by a number of provinces in the country of South Africa that we will look at later. But these mountains play a unique and important role in much of South African history. Now, down here in the Cape, so this is the Cape of Good Hope, of course, we have sea level, but with some mountains, and so there's this whole coastline which is at sea level, but the elevation begins to rise pretty quickly, and in some cases up to a fair elevation within a short distance from the coast, right? The other thing that this physical map, and so these coastlands obviously are going to be important for settlement. It's not a coincidence that Cape Town is the first place that's settled. It's the most accessible from the sea. Another place that becomes an important population center quite quickly is Durban, especially a center for European settlement. These two sites are the two most accessible ports, natural ports in South Africa. Durban actually less so, because there was a sandbar that prevented ships from getting into the harbor of Durban. That sandbar was removed by the British in the 19th century, I think. But the other place that was settled even before that, of course, is Table Bay or Table Mountain region, what becomes Cape Town by the end of the 17th century. So these two harbors. Now, South Africa otherwise does not have a lot of natural harbors. And in fact, it's difficult to land on this place given the ocean currents that run both in the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. Make it difficult to access the coast this far south in Africa. It's also not a coincidence that the Cape of Good Hope is also known as the Cape of Storms, because the ship or the ocean going there is quite treacherous, and so this was not settled as or explored as early as some other, by Europeans, I should say, as early as some other parts of Africa. There are a number of important rivers in South Africa. The three I would say that are the most important, the longest, and most important economically are the Limpopo River here, which forms the boundary between South Africa and part of Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique up here, right? So the Limpopo emerges from here and flows into the Indian Ocean. It's actually the second longest river that flows out of Africa into the Indian Ocean, behind the Zambezi River, which is the northern bound of Zimbabwe. The Fall River, that's spelled Vaal, which comes out of the Drakensberg Escarpment here and flows down, eventually flowing into the Orange River, right? But this was an important dividing line historically, and still is, in fact. Historically, with the settlements of the Dutch origin Afrikaners, they formed two republics, one called the Free State, which is here, and then the other one called the Transvaal, meaning the area across the Fall River up here into this part of South Africa. The other river that's of tremendous importance, in fact the longest river in South Africa, is the Orange River, which flows out of the Drakensberg Escarpment here, and then all the way through this desert region over here into the Atlantic on the west coast of South Africa, and in fact forms the boundary between modern-day Namibia and South Africa. So those three rivers are important. There are a number of other rivers down here in the Cape region and other places that obviously are important for agriculture and transportation and things like this as well. South Africa has a varied geography, and given that it is bounded by the Atlantic and Indian Ocean coasts, and that it has this massive plateau, it runs the gamut through all sorts of different types of geography. You have high desert up here, really some of the driest desert in the world, which extends up into Namibia and Botswana, the Kalahari and Namib deserts up here. So we range from desert to a Mediterranean climate down here around the Cape of Good Hope, but then subtropical coast down here where Durban is, Natal, KwaZulu-Natal, and subtropical lowveld, that is lowlands to the east of the Drakensberg Escarpment here in Swaziland, and the very far northeastern part of South Africa. The rainfall levels are incredibly high here, so this is subtropical climate. And then we have sort of everything in the middle of these two. A semi-arid plateau here, a kind of moderate coast with the lower rainfall levels than we find over here in the southeast. A moderate eastern plateau over here, the Free State and Transvaal regions, as well as Lesotho. The escarpment, meaning the mountain range that runs through here. And the rainfall levels are really quite high there, and especially if you go to the east, of course, we're going to have subtropical. So a lot of varied climate, and as a result, varied types of societies that take shape in pre-colonial Africa, and that continue to have, or rather the geography continues to have an influence after European incursions into the area. Rainfall levels are important for understanding the history of human settlements. There are two essential dividing lines here. I mean, we could probably parse it out more than that, but 40 centimeters or 400 millimeters above that, agriculture, cereal agriculture in particular, is possible, right? So grain farming is possible in these regions of gray and sort of everything to the north and east of that. In this lavender purplish area here, between 20 and 40 centimeters agriculture is not very possible without enhanced irrigation, but pastoralism is. And so herding animals becomes the major feature of the economies of the societies that take shape there. And then, all of the stuff in the Northwest here is desert, and this really only possible for maybe some hunter-gatherers to live there, though they would prefer to live in moister areas where there's more food available, right? So not a lot of human populations historically in the northwestern part of South Africa, and even today you don't see a lot of population there, right? So the most densely populated areas are going to be these eastern and northern parts, and the subtropical areas here east of the Drakensberg Escarpment. The Mediterranean climate down here around Cape Town does have some pockets where there's heavy rainfall, high levels of rainfall, as you see down here by around Stellenbosch and Paarl and places like that that become important centers for farming. There's a lot of fruit farming and things that take place down there in the Cape, in those little pockets of high rainfall. You have a couple of other parts on the coast here that get fairly heavy rainfall. But the human societies that take shape are going to be, then this is pre-colonial, so pre-European, farmers, mixed agriculture in the eastern part of South Africa, the Bantu peoples there, and we'll talk about them later. And then the pastoralists, the so-called Khoikhoi, who are a mix between the Aboriginal inhabitants pre-Bantu of this area, the Khoisan people, and yes, there's a click in that, and I'll talk about that later. But the Khoisan peoples who were hunter-gatherers, they mix with the Bantus and take over and live mostly by herding animals, and then the Bantus who live kind of in the margins of this territory, especially up into as the Bantus move into this area, as early as the first couple of centuries CE, they sort of push the San, the hunter-gatherers, more and more into the arid regions and even into the desert. So they, the longest surviving hunter-gatherer societies in Africa, in southern Africa, I should say, are up here in the Kalahari Desert. The various groups of the Khoisan, the Hung, and anyway, there are a few others. So the rainfall is an important marker of geography. And then finally, the last thing I'll say about geography in terms of impact is the mineral wealth of South Africa. South Africa has tremendous iron and copper deposits, even surface deposits, and so these Bantu and Khoikhoi society, especially the Bantu, were able to take advantage of that in making iron and copper tools, using copper for ornamentation and decoration. And then even there's some surface gold as well that they use for ornament. Of course, the gold and diamond and other deposits which are found in great abundance in South Africa are not fully taken advantage of until modern mining techniques are able to delve deep into the earth, in some cases even a couple of miles deep into the earth with some of these gold mines. And one thing you'll note here is, from the kind of the Central Free State region up here into Gauteng, into the area around Johannesburg, there are just tremendous gold deposits. This whole area is known as the Gold Reef. And it's gold that makes South Africa a major player in the international economy starting in the late 19th century. Diamonds a bit before that. Some of the richest diamond mines in the world were discovered in the 1870s down here in the Western Cape and the western part of the Free State region, especially around the city of Kimberley. And so that's going to be part of our story as well. Okay, so that's our comment about geography. We will devote our time to talking about the early societies of South Africa in the next lecture.